Section 21 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 21. How nice it must be, she said, in the country, struggling, as Mr. Whittaker had told her, with that violent grudge against the world which had scorned her, sneered at her, cast her off, beginning with this indignity, the infliction of her unlovable body which people could not bear to see. Do her hair as she might, her forehead remained like an egg, bald, white. No clothes suited her. She might buy anything. And for a woman, of course, that meant never meeting the opposite sex. Never would she come first with anyone. Sometimes lately it had seemed to her that, except for Elizabeth, her food was all that she lived for, her comforts, her dinner, her tea, her hot water bottle at night. But one must fight, vanquish, have faith in God. Mr. Whittaker had said she was there for a purpose. But no one knew the agony. He said, pointing to the crucifix, that God knew. But why should she have to suffer when other women like Clarissa Dalloway escaped? Knowledge comes through suffering, said Mr. Whittaker. She had passed the pillar box, and Elizabeth had turned into the cool brown tobacco department of the Army and Navy stores while she was still muttering to herself what Mr. Whittaker had said about knowledge coming through suffering into the flesh. The flesh, she muttered. What department did she want? Elizabeth interrupted her. Petticoats, she said abruptly, and stalked straight onto the lift. Up they went. Elizabeth guided her this way and that, guided her in her abstraction as if she had been a great child, an unwieldy battleship. There were the petticoats, brown, decorous, striped, frivolous, solid, flimsy, and she chose, in her abstraction, portentously, and the girl serving thought her mad. Elizabeth rather wondered, as they did up the parcel, what Miss Kilman was thinking. They must have their tea, said Miss Kilman, rousing, collecting herself. They had their tea. Elizabeth rather wondered whether Miss Kilman could be hungry. It was her way of eating with intensity, then looking again and again at a plate of sugared cakes on the table next them. Then, when a lady and a child sat down and the child took the cake, could Miss Kilman really mind it? Yes, Miss Kilman did mind it. She had wanted that cake, the pink one. The pleasure of eating was almost the only pure pleasure left her, and then to be baffled even in that. When people are happy, they have a reserve, she had told Elizabeth, upon which to draw, whereas she was like a wheel without a tire. She was fond of such metaphors. Jolted by every pebble, so she would say, staying on after the lesson, standing by the fireplace with her bag of books, her satchel, she called it, on a Tuesday morning, after the lesson was over. And she talked too about the war. After all, there were people who did not think the English invariably right. There were books. There were meetings. There were other points of view. Would Elizabeth like to come with her to listen to so-and-so, a most extraordinary-looking old man? Then Miss Kilman took her to some church in Kensington, and they had tea with a clergyman. She had lent her books, law, medicine, politics. All professions are open to women of your generation, said Miss Kilman. But for herself, her career was absolutely ruined, and was it her fault? Good gracious, said Elizabeth, no. And her mother would come calling to say that a hamper had come from Burton, and would Miss Kilman like some flowers. To Miss Kilman she was always very, very nice. But Miss Kilman squashed the flowers all in a bunch, and hadn't any small talk, and what interested Miss Kilman bored her mother, and Miss Kilman and she were terrible together, and Miss Kilman swelled and looked very plain. But then Miss Kilman was frightfully clever. Elizabeth had never thought about the poor. They lived with everything they wanted. Her mother had breakfast in bed every day. Lucy carried it up, and she liked old women because they were duchesses, and being descended from some lord. But Miss Kilman said, one of those Tuesday mornings when the lesson was over, "My grandfather kept an oil and colour shop in Kensington." Miss Kilman made one feel so small. Miss Kilman took another cup of tea. Elizabeth, with her oriental bearing, her inscrutable mystery, sat perfectly upright. No, she did not want anything more. She looked for her gloves, her white gloves. They were under the table. Ah, but she must not go. Miss Kilman could not let her go. This youth that was so beautiful, this girl whom she genuinely loved. Her large hand opened and shut on the table. But perhaps it was a little flat somehow, Elizabeth felt, and really she would like to go. But, said Miss Kilman, I've not quite finished yet. Of course, then, Elizabeth would wait. But it was rather stuffy in here. "Are you going to the party tonight?" Miss Kilman said. Elizabeth supposed she was going. Her mother wanted her to go. "She must not let parties absorb her," Miss Kilman said, fingering the last 2 inches of a chocolate eclair. She did not much like parties, Elizabeth said. Miss Kilman opened her mouth, slightly projected her chin, and swallowed down the last inches of the chocolate eclair, then wiped her fingers and washed the tea round in her cup. She was about to split asunder, she felt. The agony was so terrific. If she could grasp her, if she could clasp her, if she could make her hers absolutely and forever and then die, that was all she wanted. But to sit here, unable to think of anything to say, to see Elizabeth turning against her, to be felt repulsive even by her, it was too much. She could not stand it. The thick fingers curled inwards. "I never go to parties," said Miss Kilman, "just to keep Elizabeth from going. People don't ask me to parties." And she knew as she said it that it was this egotism that was her undoing. Mr. Whittaker had warned her, but she could not help it. She had suffered so horribly. "Why should they ask me?" she said. "I'm plain. I'm unhappy." She knew it was idiotic, but it was all those people passing, people with parcels who despised her, who made her say it. However, she was Doris Kilman. She had her degree. She was a woman who had made her way in the world. Her knowledge of modern history was more than respectable. "I don't pity myself," she said. "I pity—" She meant to say your mother, but no, she could not to Elizabeth. "I pity other people," she said. More. Like some dumb creature who has been brought up to a gate for an unknown purpose, and stands there longing to gallop away, Elizabeth Dalloway sat silent. Was Miss Kilman going to say anything more? "Don't quite forget me," said Doris Kilman. Her voice quivered. Right away to the end of the field the dumb creature galloped in terror. The great hand opened and shut. Elizabeth turned her head. The waitress came. "One had to pay at the desk," Elizabeth said, and went off, drawing out, so Miss Kilman felt, the very entrails in her body, stretching them as she crossed the room, and then, with a final twist, bowing her head very politely, she went. She had gone. Miss Kilman sat at the marble table among the eclairs, stricken once, twice, thrice by shocks of suffering. She had gone. Mrs. Dalloway had triumphed. Elizabeth had gone. Beauty had gone. Youth had gone. So she sat. She got up, blundered off among the little tables, rocking slightly from side to side, and somebody came after her with her petticoat, and she lost her way, and was hemmed in by trunks specially prepared for taking to India. Next got among the accouchement sets and baby linen. Through all the commodities of the world, perishable and permanent, hams, drugs, flowers, stationery, variously smelling, now sweet, now sour, she lurched, saw herself thus lurching with her hat askew, very red in the face, full length in a looking-glass, and at last came out into the street. The tower of Westminster Cathedral rose in front of her, the habitation of God. In the midst of the traffic there was the habitation of God. Doggedly she set off with her parcel to that other sanctuary, the Abbey, where, raising her hands in a tent before her face, she sat beside those driven into shelter too. The variously assorted worshippers, now divested of social rank, almost of sex, as they raised their hands before their faces, but once they removed them, instantly reverent, middle-class, English men and women, some of them desirous of seeing the waxworks. But Miss Kilman held her tent before her face. Now she was deserted, now rejoined. New worshippers came in from the street to replace the strollers, and still, as people gazed round and shuffled past the tomb of the unknown warrior, still she barred her eyes with her fingers and tried, in this double darkness, for the light in the Abbey was bodiless, to aspire above the vanities, the desires, the commodities, to rid herself both of hatred and of love. Her hands twitched. She seemed to struggle. Yet to others God was accessible, and the path to him smooth. Mr. Fletcher, retired, of the Treasury, Mrs. Gorham, widow of the famous K.C., approached him simply, and having done their praying, leant back, enjoyed the music, the organ pealed sweetly, and saw Miss Kilman at the end of the row, praying, and being still on the threshold of their underworld, thought of her sympathetically as a soul haunting the same territory, a soul cut out of immaterial substance, not a woman, a soul. But Mr. Fletcher had to go. He had to pass her, and being himself neat as a new pin, could not help being a little distressed by the poor lady's disorder, her hair down, her parcel on the floor. She did not at once let him pass. But as he stood gazing about him at the white marbles, grey window panes, and accumulated treasures, for he was extremely proud of the Abbey, her largeness, robustness, and power as she sat there shifting her knees from time to time, it was so rough the approach to her God, so tough her desires, impressed him as they had impressed Mrs. Dalloway. She could not get the thought of her out of her mind that afternoon. The Reverend Edward Whittaker, and Elizabeth too. And Elizabeth waited in Victoria Street for an omnibus. It was so nice to be out of doors. She thought perhaps she need not go home just yet. It was so nice to be out in the air. So she would get on to an omnibus. And already, even as she stood there in her very well-cut clothes, it was beginning. People were beginning to compare her to poplar trees, early dawn, hyacinths, fawns, running water, and garden lilies, and it made her life a burden to her, for she so much preferred being left alone to do what she liked in the country. But they would compare her to lilies, and she had to go to parties, and London was so dreary compared with being alone in the country with her father and the dogs. Buses swooped, settled, were off. Garish caravans, glistening with red and yellow varnish. But which should she get on to? She had no preferences. Of course she would not push her way. She inclined to be passive. It was expression she needed, but her eyes were fine, Chinese, Oriental, and as her mother said, with such nice shoulders and holding herself so straight, she was always charming to look at. And lately, in the evening especially, when she was interested, for she never seemed excited, she looked almost beautiful, very stately, very serene. What could she be thinking? Every man fell in love with her, and she was really awfully bored. For it was beginning. Her mother could see that. The compliments were beginning. That she did not care more about it, for instance, for her clothes, sometimes worried Clarissa. But perhaps it was as well with all these puppies and guinea pigs about, having distemper, and it gave her a charm. And now there was this odd friendship with Miss Kilman. Well, thought Clarissa about 3 o'clock in the morning, reading Baron Marbo, for she could not sleep, it proves she has a heart. End of section 21. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 26th of September, 2021.